welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, and welcome to another chapter of Turn the Page, the official podcast of Syosset Public Library. This is Jenn, your co-host for today, and I'm here with the writer of a really fun new book that I can't wait to dig into. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
My name is Ian Fortey, and my book is Werecage, possibly the best book ever about Nick Cage lycanthropy.
Yeah, I think that would be fair to say. This is definitely the best book that I've ever read about Nicolas Cage related lycanthropy. I'm wondering, before we get into the book itself, if you could tell me a little bit about your writing career and how it got you to this book, because you've written for some of my favorite comedy websites and for a lot of really cool outlets. So I was wondering if you could take us through that.
Yeah, sure. I started writing online at the tail end of 2007. Cracked.com used to source their writers just from their readership. They would put out semi-regular calls. If you feel like you can write an article, pitch us and see what happens. So that's what I did. I pitched just after Thanksgiving. They did like a yearly call for freelancers. So I pitched an article about medication side effects because that was around the time. I can't even remember what medication it was anymore, but it caused an increased urge to gamble. It was on the commercials that it told you that it did that. And I thought has to be one of the weirdest side effects I've ever heard of. So a little bit of research, I found 7 more. I pitched it, I got accepted. And that was the first thing I ever wrote professionally. And then I ended up, I've probably written a couple hundred articles since then for Cracked specifically. I became a columnist for a while. Then, college humor later on, and a number of other sites. I ran my own site called Holy Taco for a few years. It was by Break Media. They went out of business and were terrible, and they still owe me a lot of money.
Oh, geez.
Nonetheless, it was fun while it lasted. But yeah, so in the last however many years that's been, too many years now, I guess. I refuse to do the math. I've probably written a few thousand articles that are either comedy or at least semi-comedy, sort of general knowledge, trivia-based things, and that's fun and all. But I do like to write fiction. I wrote a novel when I was in high school, handwritten 1,000-page novel when I was in high school.
Wow.
That no one will ever read because it's awful, just atrocious. It's exactly what you expect a mostly nerdy kid in grade 10 to write after reading a lot of genre fiction. Anyway, but yeah, I've always had that passion. So I, started only in the last couple of years, really have started writing fiction as opposed to freelance nonfiction stuff for other people. So I've been enjoying it, and Werecage is the first completely kind of unfettered book that I've written. I have some other books that I wrote for another company, so they are technically freelance, even though it was my ideas, and I was given freedom to play a lot with what I was writing. But Werecage was beholden to no one but me, and I don't think anyone would have ever let me write that book. So, yeah, I had fun with it on my own.
That's great. Yeah, I'm so glad this book exists because I've been a Nicolas Cage fan since I was I think probably 14, 15 when Face Off came out, and it just I saw it in theaters and I was like, this is the best movie ever made, completely sincerely. And I feel like over time Face Off fans have been vindicated.
Yes.
It is a good movie. So yeah, I'm wondering about how your let's say your journey as a Nicolas Cage fan, where did you get on the Nicolas Cage bus?
Yeah, see, that's the thing. Nicolas Cage has had a very interesting career. He was, people often write, if you read articles in the media, someone mentioned that he won an Academy Award, and it's almost like an apology. He was a good actor once. He is a good actor, I say, because no one else I can think of gives it as much effort, no matter what the role is, as Nicolas Cage. He goes way over the top, and I have to appreciate that.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, he's in on it. Like he gets it. When you listen to interviews with him, Nicolas Cage understands that a lot of the movies he's made are silly, and so he goes with that. But um, it was in that era: Face Off, Con Air, The Rock. I think all three of those came out one after the other, if I'm not mistaken, way back in the day. And that's when I really got into enjoying Nick Cage movies because they're fun action movies. They're kind of a little over the top, but still good examples of the genre at the time period, I think.
Mhm.
But his performance was always really a standout because Nicolas Cage is always Nicolas Cage. And then when his career started going on a downturn, people started making fun of the stuff he was doing. And I think a lot of that came from his own personal financial issues. I think he was just trying to make money to pay off the dinosaurs that he bought
Mhm.
and whatever else that he had. But like The Wicker Man is often touted as like an example of a really bad Nick Cage movie. But I love that movie because he doesn't stop for a bit. It's like he's angry that he's in the movie and he wants you to know about it. And I love every minute of. There's a scene where he's dressed like a bear and he wind sprints up a hill and just knocks somebody out. It's amazing. I don't get how anyone could not like that. But anyway, I really appreciate. And now there's like the Nick Cage Renaissance
Mm.
with like Pig and Mandy, Color Out of Space, and I actually can't remember the name of that new film where he basically plays himself because I haven't seen it yet.
Oh,
But
right. Oh gosh, the unbearable weight of massive talent, I think.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So people are coming back into the Nick Cage sphere, which is great because I think he deserves it. He's just fun to watch, and I think that's what an actor should be above all else. If I'm
Mm.
not having fun watching your movie, I don't know why I'm watching it. So, and I appreciate that about them. So, Werecage is like a love letter basically to that idea of Nick Cage that he's just fun, and more Nick Cage is never a bad thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like he always gives 110%, like no matter the project.
Yeah,
And he's just always like he never really does the thing that would be like the easy thing to do, you know? Like he always like just brings something very strange and very unique to the role, no matter like how
yeah,
the movie is around him. I really like admire that in a way.
yeah.
Um,
He does include. There's so many like strange touches. He'll do a voice for no good reason. He'll have an accent in a movie that doesn't make any sense. Like the way he speaks, even the cadence of his speech in something like Kick Ass, where he's got a fairly small role, but it's very standout in the film that you really remember him. And it's just in the Color Out of Space, he has an accent I couldn't even begin to place. But I love his performance in that movie. It's because there's everything in that movie is really great. I thought really extreme, no rests for the wicked in that movie. But yeah, like yeah, he puts the effort in, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, he does. That movie is great. It's so strange and so disturbing, but also
Yeah,
really funny. And I think a lot of those adjectives actually could be applied to this book, which is just like it's so much fun, but there's also like a lot of really effective horror in it too, and that's like a great line that it walks.
yeah, I like to do. I mean, because I've written so much comedy, I actually find it kind of hard to do straight horror.
Mm.
I love horror. I've loved horror for years. I used to have when I was really. People often were like, "What was wrong with your parents?" When they hear that, like how young I was when I started watching horror. But to me, it's always been, well, it's a movie. It's not real. It doesn't. So I've never been disturbed by horror necessarily, but I just love how the genre works. But the comedy aspect, it's hard for me to keep out. So even when I try sometimes, so I don't fight it all the time. Obviously, Werecage it just worked really well with that idea. So
Mm. Yeah, it did work really well. And I think that like the humor and the horror are really well balanced. Yeah, let's talk about the book a little bit. So it takes place in a town that has just had a Nicolas Cage film retrospective because he was just in town filming a movie. And I really love the detail that he's filming a movie with Frank Grillo because that is exactly like the sort of person that he would be in a movie with these days. Just very good knowledge of the genre. Like, so where did this book start for you? Like, was there like what was the idea that kind of like sparked this whole thing?
yeah, I like I said, I like to write a lot. I actually have a folder or file um, in Google Docs that's just called Future Ideas, and if I have an idea, there it goes.
Mm.
I'm probably up to about 50 different ideas, which can range. Some of them are literally 2 words long. Some of them are fairly fleshed out. But years ago, 2014, 2015, I wrote a guy bites a guy becomes guy, and that was it for a long time. It sat like that, and then I wrote a screenplay for fun called Nick Cage versus Zombies
Mm.
back in the day, and I submitted that to some film festivals and actually won a couple of awards, and that sort of started my I should write about Nick Cage quest. And then guy bites guy becomes Nick Cage bites guy becomes Nick Cage, and that's where that developed from.
Ah, that's so great. It's such a great idea. And and it kind of works because like with Nicolas Cage, like he's such an out there figure who like, is really wrapped up in like being weird and unpredictable. Like when you first hear that story that like Nicolas Cage bites a man, like it's slightly plausible, like like it would be a surprise, but not really. You'd be like, well, like he does a lot of weird stuff. So it's like
Yeah,
grounding for it feels really real.
I mean, some of the terrible things you've heard of, like it's not like Army Hammer or anything.
Oh yeah.
So we're scaling it back. Like, yeah, all right, yeah, Nicolas Cage could bite a guy. I'll buy that.
Yeah. Not hard. Like I don't think he would injure somebody, but I could see it being
Yeah,
sort of like a statement. So why do you think like as a culture, like we are so obsessed with Nicolas Cage, so fascinated by him?
I think it is a lot of the fact that he does really go over the top in a lot of his performances, and yet he chooses some unusual roles. His early work, a lot of it was much more mainstream,
Mm.
and then as time has gone by, he's really taken some left turns on you. If not the subject matter, then how he approaches it. Certainly, like the way he portrayed Ghost Rider was very strange. I thought there's a lot of scenes I really enjoy in that movie. Just if you if you watch that movie again, pay attention to how often he will set his feet and then point at another character. It's really weird. It's an unnatural pose and an unnatural action, and he must do it a half dozen times. I don't know why, but it's little things like that that I think capture people's imagination about him, and then the whole personal life thing too. Like the man lost a fortune apparently on castles and dinosaur bones and who knows what else over the years, which is just weird. And then when he gives you interviews, he talks about how his acting method is called nouveau shamanic, and that doesn't mean anything to anyone.
No.
And I don't think he's ever explained it either, or at least not very adequately. So you're just like, oh, okay, that's what you do. That sounds reasonable.
Yeah. It's pretty effective branding, I think. Like it's a good name for whatever it is he's doing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, a lot of it too is that even though he does all these out there things and picks these weird roles and does really weird interpretations of them, like in interviews, he also, even while he's talking about weird things, he always like kind of comes off as like grounded and normal, like
Yeah.
he's in on the joke,
Mm-hmm.
like he knows how we all see him and what his like image is. And so there is this like really weird and interesting combination with him of just like complete out there-ness and like I don't know, some kind of like rationality or something. Like he's just like he's very interesting and mysterious.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I like that you have fun watching a Nick Cage movie, and I think I mean, I honestly think that he wants an audience. He should want an audience to have fun. Any actor should, but I think that's definitely at the forefront of how he performs in a lot of his films. Like he wants to entertain you,
Mm.
and I'm not sure that's necessarily what every actor is thinking when they're doing. Not that they don't want you to be entertained, but I don't know if that's like really at the forefront of their mind when they're trying to, when you hear about method actors trying to nail a character and they're living like this person off screen, off camera and stuff. I don't know that that's the same approach that Nicolas Cage might take to delivering a role. So
Mm. Yeah, I think that's true too. Yeah, because like I think so much of modern acting like does trend toward realism and making things as like real and believable as possible. And that is definitely like not what his goal is. And so he just is like bringing so many different like I guess, ambitions and goals into his work that just really make him stand out. Um,
Mhm.
I want to talk a little bit about like how the horror and the comedy kind of support each other, because something I noticed that really struck out to me was that like a lot of the body horror like around the transformation into Nick Cage is like very effective body horror. Like it's a horrifying process that he has to go through in order to become Nicolas Cage. And it also like really touches on like the horror that's inherent in being famous. Because like when he is Nicolas Cage, there's like so much attention on him and he finds it so like disorienting and awful. And I'm just
Mhm.
wondering if you could like talk a little bit about like, yeah, like what was your approach to the horror and like what things were you exploring with that?
I did want to set up a contract because it's a super silly premise. I mean, I want everyone to understand that right off the bat, and that's why the tagline is really simple, about Nick Cage biting a guy. Um, but at the same time, like the implications of that in the little world I set up would be terrible. And I really enjoy body horror. That's probably one of my favorite subgenres. And I really like werewolf stories and lycanthropy and that kind of stuff. So the idea of not being in control of how your body works any longer, something is taking over. You're still in there, but you don't have that control anymore. And that's to me is like much more terrifying than an outside, like the other. When you become the other, that's scary to me. Um, as much as you're going to push scary in a book like this, because I want to keep it, I want to draw it back to the idea that it's still a little bit goofy at the same time. And then how the character Stanley relates to it when he starts kind of feeling like he's enjoying being Nick Cage. There's something really liberating about it. It's just, it's like trying on a new suit and you really like the way it makes you feel. It's, so it's sort of the best and worst of both worlds he's going through,
Mm,
which I think is kind of inherent in most of these kind of stories where someone becomes something else. There's the horror of it, but there's often, even if it's unspoken, that kind of sense of freedom. I think
mm,
that's a really big part of any werewolf story. Like,
mm,
you've become feral. You're wild now. You're not bound by rules or anything. And the implications of that can be terrible and
mm,
monstrous. And that's often what's focused on in these kinds of stories. But for a minute there, you're a little bit envious of the idea of just being wild and free, even if that
mm.
means you have to be Nick Cage.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I think that there is a lot of interesting overlap there because like, yeah, Nicolas Cage isn't really like bound by many rules and he he kind of like does what he wants and like he is who he is. And so like there are nice, I think, parallels with werewolves and the sort of like freedoms that they represent there. Um yeah, and I think that there's something interesting too about like how we all kind of like wish we could be famous even if just for like a day or two to experience it, and we all know on some level that it would be horrible, but we still kind of want to do it. Like there is a like I love the part of horror that is like, yeah, that is like uh perhaps like is appealing to like some of like the things that we I guess don't really want to admit about ourselves, or I might be thinking about it too much, but.
No, I definitely think I think the monster, whatever it is in any horror, whether that's, ghost faced in Scream or Dracula or a werewolf, I think there is that little bit of identity between you identify with that character just a little bit, and maybe like showing you the ugly side is kind of where the horror comes from. Obviously, you don't want to be a monster, but you're like, I mean, that's why horror, the genre, is really built on the villains rather than the heroes.
Mm,
People want to see more of Jason and Freddy and Pinhead. They don't really care about the person who dies tragically, or his many, many friends over the course of the series. You want to see the villain. You want to see them keep going because that's who entertains you.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that does make me think that like the villain in horror movies usually is like the most interesting character because like all of the other characters sort of like by definition have to be like blank slates a little bit, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, Nicolas Cage is just like, I don't know, he like fits into this role just so nicely. Oh, there was one other thing that I did want to like point out before we wrap up because there's just like a lot of really interesting little like thought tirades. Uh that like we get to experience through our main character. And there's one in particular that I really enjoyed, which was about him like not understanding people who eat dinner late. um, like I have always been an early dinner eater, and I never understood waiting till like 8 or 9 to eat. And I in fact got like made fun of that a lot when I studied abroad in college, because Europeans really like to eat late, and I couldn't do it. So but that brings me to, I guess, one of my questions, which is that obviously like the main character shares some characteristics with you because he is a Nicolas Cage fan and you are a Nicolas Cage fan. And I'm
Mhm.
wondering like how much you put your own like self and thoughts into like some of his perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, there's definitely some of that. I mean, the grocery store thing, even something as simple as that, because I that was one of my that was the first job I had in college, just stocking shelves, and that monotony there, where your mind just kind of wanders off to other places, and you become a little bit robotic while you're doing it. So there's definitely and absolutely dinner. What are you doing eating dinner at 8 o'clock at night? That's it's just crazy to me. But
Yeah.
yeah, um, it's easy to draw on things that like the minutia of everyday life, things that make sense to me to flesh out a character. And I think if I were to be bit by Nick Cage, what would I do? And
Mm.
that's really all I can go off of. Right? Wow, how would that strike me?
Mm.
What seems like the most normal reaction to an absolutely abnormal situation. So there's definitely a little bit of me in Stanley in terms of how he relates to the world and maybe some of his neuroses and whatnot in dealing with the situation and other characters.
Yeah, he's very relatable, and he I guess he is notable sort of as the protagonist of like a horror thing, in that like a lot of horror operates on like the main character making like the worst possible decision in a situation, and Stanley
Hmm.
kind of does like what, like, it makes sense to do the things that he does faced with what he is faced with here. Like he really is very relatable, and he is, I think, is reacting to this the way that like any of us would react to this, as weird as that is to imagine. But
Yeah, some of it I wanted it to be the idea and him working with his roommate as well to determine the best course of action when there's literally no way to know. It's stupid to even try to figure out, like when they're referring to Wilfred Brimley's mathematical equations from the movie The Thing to figure out how much time they have until the world's going to end. And that was actually the first, like, how long would it take Nick Cage to take over the world? And I thought, well, what was the math that they used in The Thing? And that's why I put it, because I realized it was stupid of me to think of that. So now my character is stupid for thinking that. But I mean, with no basis of reference, no frame of reference at all for something like this, what would you do?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I think this book answers that, that burning question, and it's really fun to kind of work through this scenario with Stanley and with his roommate. Like Cameron is a lot of fun too, and I think
Mm-hmm.
he really captures like that weird dynamic of having a roommate, in that period of your life where it's like the person that you see the most and know the most in some ways, but also is like kind of a stranger in some other ways. Like
Yeah,
there's a lot of good stuff there just about like being in that period of your life where you're sort of like not sure what you want to do with yourself, and you're trying to find your way. And like there's like a lot of good, I think, emotional beats there too, just about kind of like being lost in your like yeah, I guess in the years before midlife crisis.
yeah. I mean, well, some of the themes are definitely like he doesn't know who he is, and now he's somebody else.
Mm.
That's just a burden that you don't really carry around at any point in time, but still has to be dealt with before everyone dies.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really fun to go on this journey with him. And I'm really grateful that you came to talk to us about it, because I just really love this book, and I really want other people to read it. Do you have anything else going on? Or is there anything that you're working on now that you can talk about? Or
Actually, another book that I released after Werecage called When Demons Dream, which is something I wrote a long time ago, and then I just kind of retooled it a little bit. It's a very dark Neil Gaiman-ish kind of a story. It's not. I mean, there's some humor in it, but it's much more grim. The story itself is a lot more serious and dark than Werecage, but I do like to branch into that kind of stuff every once in a while. And then I'm also working on another book that I wanted to have done already, but it's taking a little bit too longer, called Do Velociraptors Dream of Alternative Rock? Which obviously is, a very awkward play on um, Electric Sheep and whatnot. But that's about the band Eve 6 that I know exclusively from Twitter. And I talked to them on occasion. I asked if I could write a book about the band, and I think I got a one-word yep. And so that was all the permission I needed in my mind. So it's about how Eve 6 is the product of an experimental velociraptor evolution scientific experiment, and the results of what happens when you mix human and velociraptor DNA.
Wow, that's fantastic. Like, I love everything about that. Like, I love Eve 6 and their Twitter presence, and I love the idea of Eve 6 getting that sort of treatment in this book. It sounds really fun. And I'm really excited about When Demons Dream too, because it sounds like a fun, like, it would be fun to read you like working in a different tone. So if you ever want to come back and talk about any other projects, like, please, you're always welcome.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. Well, thank you so much for making the time to talk to us. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you as well. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks. All right, listeners, you can pick up Werecage on Amazon, correct? It's a Kindle.
Yeah.
Okay,
yes.
great.
And paperback.
And paperback, great. I highly recommend it. The cover is beautiful, so actually the paperback would be really nice to have. It's a good pulpy cover. All right, thank you for listening, and we will see you next time. It is time to close this chapter. Bye-bye.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.